The State of .NET with Jeff Fritz.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast, deliver quality, and run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything the .NET ecosystem has to offer. This podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a software architecture company that empowers .NET teams to be self-sufficient and to deliver world-class results. They are hiring architects as well as .NET engineers who'd like a path to become an architect. So you can go to clearmeasure.com/careers for more information on that. And now let's get on with our interview. Jeff Fritz joins me today, and I'm excited to have him back. You can go back to show 127. He was on with us last year, and he is an experienced developer, a technical educator, and program manager on the .NET team at Microsoft. He founded the Live Coders team on Twitch and regularly live streams builds of websites, fun applications, all kinds of stuff. You can follow Jeff for more .NET, .NET Core, .NET 5.6, and Visual Studio content on Twitch and Twitter at CSharpFritz on Twitch, twitch.tv/CSharpFritz. It's a CSharpFritz. Jeff, welcome back to the show. How are you, sir?
Oh my gosh, it's great to be back. It's so good to see you.
Yeah,
I hope you're doing well.
I am. Man, it's been a busy fall. We're just off of Christmas, so Merry Christmas, yeah. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you as well. Oh my goodness, it's I find that December has turned into more of a race in recent years.
Yeah,
right. We get through November conferences, and then it's like, okay, I got to wrap everything up at the beginning of December because I want to have off for Christmas and New Year's at the end of the month.
That's right. The families are counting on it.
Yeah, right.
So awesome. Well, old news now, how we say 3-month-old news or 2-month-old news. .NET 6 is out, Visual Studio 22. You were right there in the thick of it, running a whole bunch of stuff around .NET 6 and .NET Conf for probably the few people who didn't already get into everything. If they could go and watch the .NET Conf information and you could say, okay, watch this first or make sure not to miss this, what would you say?
Oh my gosh. So you want to roll back, you want to get the latest scoop, get those demos that are going to blow you away. Make sure you check out the keynote, of course, with Scott Hunter. Really great stuff where he shows a bunch of demos around Blazor, around stuff that's coming with .NET MAUI, capabilities around minimal APIs, so we can really reduce that boilerplate code that you're always writing in every application to just get things started, to kick off your application. The ceremony around some of the application format things that we've done for many, many years that are second nature to folks like you and me, to reduce some of that ceremony. Really cool how they show that in the keynote. But if you want that really cool demo moment, you got to make sure you check out Steve Sanderson's session where he talks about Blazor and WebAssembly. Check out Dan Roth when he talks about things with advanced Blazor components. Really cool stuff that's happening in all of those sessions. And I would also make sure you check out Maddie Montequilla talking about things coming in .NET MAUI, our new mobile and native application framework that's scheduled to arrive here in the next few months. She's got some really good demos in there that are going to get you ready, hopefully get you excited, try out some previews and move in that direction.
Yeah, you mentioned MAUI. I saw one of their community stand-ups just the other day, and they're preview 11 that's out. Yep. They're saying, okay, you can do a lot of things, but there's still a few bits that are not quite in place. What are they pushing for, March or May or somewhere in that time frame? I think they mentioned, but it's coming.
It would be spring for those of us in the northern hemisphere and fall for folks in the southern. But that Q2 timeframe is what we're looking at. No guarantees exactly when. There might be a large Microsoft conference taking place at about that time that we might hook it up to. We'll see. Yeah. We'll see how it goes. The key thing that I think folks appreciate about how Maui has developed and how it's grown here over the past 2 years is that they're going to ship it when it's done. They originally wanted to package it with .NET 5, wasn't going to make it because pandemic happened. All right, we're going to package and ship it with .NET 6, and you know what? Just didn't quite meet the quality bar to ship for .NET 6. So let's make sure we do it right, reevaluate, and push it out here mid 2022.
Yeah, well, you only get a chance for one first impression, and people are excited about using it. So I don't want to spend a lot of time trying to use it and then realize, oh, I can't use it just yet because I don't want to wait until 1.3 of Maui.
Oh my gosh, and I was personally trying out using a little bit of .NET MAUI to build an application that would host an embedded video player. In using the Blazor model, the Blazor application model with .NET MAUI. And what I ran into was my embedded video player was throwing CORS errors when I was trying to host it inside of a Blazor application, inside of a Blazor web view in .NET MAUI. Okay, but if I host that embedded video player inside of a normal web view in a XAML-based .NET MAUI application, now we're talking. Mm-hmm. Cool. I got to rethink now how I build my application, but there's little things like that we're still learning and figuring out as we try and build out recommendations and strategies for folks to build applications with .NET MAUI. I love the idea as a web developer that I can lift my web application, whether it's Blazor or Angular or Vue or React, and I can put it into a .NET MAUI application, and it just works natively everywhere. I love that idea. There's going to be some exceptions around that.
I think it's the new generation of desktop and native applications because you literally can't have your one code base and just have different deployment targets. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, right. This was right. That was the goal way back in the day when Java first launched in the 90s, in the late 90s. Oh my gosh.
I remember that. Write once, run everywhere. That was Sun Microsystems tagline.
Mm-hmm. And you had that same you had that same Java rendering that was
Swing.
Not quite
Java Swing.
Yeah. It didn't look quite right on anybody's operating system. But I feel like we've advanced and we know a little bit better what we want to do, delivering and making content that works and looks appropriate, regardless of the operating system or hardware for that matter.
Right. Well, it's a good time to be a .NET developer for sure.
Yes.
It really is.
Oh my gosh. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So speaking of that, and you mentioned Java, which I went to high school and then most of college at Texas A&M University in the 90s. And I remember taking 2 classes in Java, took some other ones too, COBOL, C, data structures, yada, yada, yada. But I remember all that. And I remember how in high school, Microsoft was everywhere in my high school. And then I go to college and the actual programming courses, Microsoft was there was an active server pages course. It was only in one course and everything else was C or Java.
Yeah.
I look around now. I have a high schooler of my own and I work with the local high school and I keep on thinking to myself, why isn't C# here?
Right. And when you look at those Tech Empower benchmarks, that third party that's benchmarking web applications, the C# .NET are at the top with a bullet now, right? Number 1 fastest framework. Okay, you're right. We need to get into colleges and high schools and make educational material available for these folks. curriculum, content and tools. Now that .NET is all open source, right? This is something that should be very accessible to those folks to teach and build and know that they're going to get support around their curriculum, not just the tools, but around the training material for years and years to come. When I think about folks that are being taught Java, being taught Python in colleges and high schools, it's the open source nature of those things, the way that Sun made the Java technology open source, anybody can access it, the tools anybody can use. Yeah, made perfect sense for folks in those educational institutions to put together content and build and know that they were going to get support. Where conversely, all the Microsoft tools, you needed to buy a $1,000, $2,000 license for Visual Studio or Visual C++ or VB6 or VB whatever version, right? Back in the day. And yeah, requiring that additional expense from students puts a price tag on your class that might not be handled too well. And let's face it, that's cash that professors in the university aren't getting paid. So,
well, is .NET ready for education, you think?
That's a great question.
Like if I say, oh, hey teacher, let me show you how easy it is. Here's a free to download VS Code. And okay, now let's double click this solution file. Or, oh, that doesn't work. Okay, let's go get Visual Studio Community Edition, big download. It's like, what are we missing?
So I think we're closer than we've been in a long time. I think there's things like .NET notebooks, right? You can use Jupyter notebooks. We now have .NET notebooks that work very, very well in Visual Studio Code. We've built an education package that you can download and use inside Visual Studio Code that has a bunch of notebooks, interactive C# code and prose that you can scroll through and read, and you'll get to some code samples that you can tinker with and try out yourself. I've contributed and helped write a good chunk of those notebooks, and it's a good jump off point when I think about computer education. When we were in school, listen to this. I'm making it sound like it's been.
We have kids who are in high school, so come on.
Yeah, yeah. You learned by, and you learned by reading the book and copying out the samples and paste it into Notepad or Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code and go execute it, right? F5 run it, or Visual Studio Code now has support to go and run those things. So when you're on whatever operating system, and there's folks that have taken a flavor of Visual Studio Code and they've got it running on iOS, other folks on Android run it in the cloud with GitHub code spaces. The tools are freely available wherever you need to go. So I think that's a big help to that first barrier that colleges had where, you know what, it's an extra set of tools that we don't want to buy.
So I want to include this .NET notebooks in the show notes. Sure. We'll make sure to put that link there because that's huge. I don't think a lot of people know about that it's there.
Oh yeah, and let me also make sure you get a link to a show that I've been doing on Monday mornings. Monday mornings for those of us in the North American time zones, Western Hemisphere time zones. In the morning on Mondays, I call it C# with CSharpFritz, and I've been writing classes, 2-hour class that's live streamed, and I very much teach it like a college professor or a high school teacher, answering questions, showing my screen, and walking through samples. But the first module of it is 10 to 14 lessons. It's about 14 lessons now that are all built using .NET notebooks, and you can go to my GitHub repository, double click on those, open them up in Visual Studio Code, and you can interact with them and see those code samples running live right there in Visual Studio Code. I've also got a link that you can click through and run it in your browser using a tool called Binder. And you don't need to install anything. You want to run it on your iPad, on your Android tablet with a keyboard so you can tinker and interact with it. Go for it. The code is all out there. And it's coming back to, we've written books about how to do this stuff. To have that interactive code right there that you can touch and tweak and build and see how it responds to you. My gosh, Jeff, this is what we imagined when we've been writing books for how many years here, and in Dead Tree version, to have that interactive book. This is like something out of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Well, it used to be just text file, notepad, okay, command line. If you're using C, CSC, or actually C#, CSC, or whatever, and just
CPP, right?
Yeah, CPP. Compile into another file. Okay, now run this other file. Or Java even had it. Java just run
Java
this
C.
with a main, and Java C, and boom, there you go, and then run it, and the output. Of course, that was just, you have to assume console is my UI. That's if you dispense with any kind of the other frameworks. And just have a console UI.
And I look at how these notebooks work now, where I've got prose and code, and then the result, the output of that code, all in the same. It's almost an HTML document, right, stacked on top of each other. We use Markdown around it. It's so cool and easy for folks to immediately see those interactions, that content, that hello world sample, go and changing it to hello Jeff, and run it. And
who wouldn't want to do that?
I don't know anybody, but to see that result right next to the explanation of here's what's happening, without having to alt tab and bring up 3-4 different tools so you can see it at the command line, right? And see Notepad and the different things running. It's a great experience that gets us closer to where we want to be with reaching into those different organizations. There's 10 to 20 lessons there about just getting started with C#. When we get out of that and we get into, okay, let's build a Windows Forms application. Let's build a .NET MAUI application or mobile web application. Okay, now we can't be in the notebooks. Now we need to go over and start writing code, having full projects. Is there a similar training approach with getting content into there that interacts with that and displays and shows in the project? Don't know yet. Working on that.
Well, let me ask you a question. It's an analogy. I want to get your take on your thought, but it's an analogy that I use for different types of developers and learning and whatnot. But there's a job title called auto mechanic, and just more generally mechanic, because people work on trucks and whatnot. And we kind of instinctively know that a lifelong M1 Abrams Army tank mechanic is not interchangeable to be a mechanic at a Tesla dealership, right? We kind of, but at the same time, we use the word mechanic. Oh, I'm a mechanic. Oh, you're a mechanic. Awesome. And then we realize, we need to segregate ourselves into groups because, this group over here, they only do crotch rocket motorcycles. This group over here, they only do boats. This group over here, they do the Toyota cars. And then, of course, the electric cars, where the only thing common is what? Steering wheel and changing tires. So, so in developer world, if I look at the universities, they're pumping people out where they're talking about cars and vehicles can go forward. Okay, and then they teach them about these concepts and throw them out in the workforce. But nobody actually went to tank mechanic school, Tesla's car mechanic school, motorcycle mechanic school, boat mechanic school. It's like but yet this does this divide exist like I perceive it does?
Oh my gosh, yes. Oh yes. Right. And I think you make a very good point there, that I would want my educational institution to initially teach, right. And you even mentioned you had a couple classes on algorithms and data structures, those things that are pretty common concepts. Then let's layer on top of it. Okay, now we're going to bring in Java, C#, Python, take your pick of programming language, and when I say to folks who are new in our field, hey, I'm just learning to be a developer, what should I learn? Learn how to learn, because that programming language you're using today, that tool that you're using today, that target hardware that you're going to be programming towards. My gosh, none of us were programming towards mobile devices 15 years ago. Like, you weren't building iPhone apps because there wasn't such a thing.
Mm-mm.
Now there is. Okay. You weren't targeting VR 5 years ago. Now folks are prominently building and targeting VR. Of course, I'm not speaking towards the experimental devices, the initial devices that broke into those markets, but now they're markets.
Case,
the
common stuff. So
as developers, it's fantastic to learn how to learn and understand those common things that, the data structures, algorithms, how to work in object-oriented concepts. You're familiar with those things, so you can make that jump from C# to Java. You just need to learn the nuances in the base class libraries, the various references that you can bring in. All right, you make that jump into Python, dynamic languages, working with Python and JavaScript. Okay, great. How do I get into Rust and Go and F# and Clojure and these other things? Well, if you've already got that foundation, making that jump from one to the next as needed isn't that big a deal. So, and there's nothing wrong with any of those languages. They each have their own place. They each excel at doing different things. I think that for a long time, for a lot of folks, .NET isn't even getting considered because of those artificial gates that were erected in front of, and no pun intended, artificial gates that were erected in front of Microsoft developer tooling and features and technologies.
Many thanks to our podcast sponsor, ClearMeasure. ClearMeasure is a software architecture company that empowers clients' development teams to be self-sufficient, moving fast, delivering quality, and running their systems with confidence. Whether starting a new project or developing new technologies or techniques, ClearMeasure sets up your team to deliver world-class results. Learn more at www.clearmeasure.com. ClearMeasure, empowering software delivery.
Well, that brings the question of this divide in people who build software, just like the divide in people who work on vehicles.
Yeah.
Should it be the type, or not should it be, is it the type of organization, type of application like mobile or online or desktop or embedded? When it, to me, see your take on this, it seems to be the environment that the people work in, or maybe the set of tools people work in. Like, some people may do their career in 18-wheeler mechanics, and some may cross over and switch. But by and large, people who get into 18-wheeler mechanics, they make a career of it. And you say, I'm a mechanic. Can you help me with my motorcycle? No, I only work on 18-wheelers. Sorry.
Right. But I think there's also something to be said of, you know the basics. You know how an engine works. It's a much smaller engine when you take a look at that motorcycle. Yeah. Versus, right, that Honda motorcycle versus the 18-wheeler, much larger pistons and engine that's happening over there in the 18-wheeler, and it's running diesel, and versus the little Honda motorcycle. Okay, it's a much smaller. It runs on gasoline, and the concepts are all there. You're going to be able to check for oil and some other things once you orient yourself to that engine. Right, the concepts are there. It might take you a day or two to know where all the basic things are. Those advanced topics around, well, here's how the turbocharger works, and this, that, and the other. Those things are going to take a little bit more learning, probably a couple weeks to a month. But you could probably make that adjustment between the two with help, not just on your own learning. But you could probably make that adjustment in a couple months, easy. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that everybody could do this, but you could make that adjustment, right? Certainly, there are folks that are working at a Toyota dealership, and they go work and they leave that job and they go work at a Honda dealership, and they can make that adjustment because they're very similar in structure, right? They go for training every year or so.
Passenger cars.
Okay. Yeah, right. It's similar, but making that adjustment to different sizes of things, very similar to how I'm a web developer. I very much admit I am a web first developer. I learned and cut my teeth building websites. Me learning to build a mobile application and using XAML, that's an uphill travel for me. I've got to make that journey and learn now a new language. I've got to learn XAML. I know HTML, but now I've got to learn this. But once I know the markup, the things that it does behind the scenes, I know how to do already. I know data binding. I know formatting and styling. I just need to learn the language around it. Is that going to take me a month or two to do? No, it'll probably take me a couple days to a week, depending on how much time I can put into it. So to the question of, should we call ourselves, should we be that specialized? I think there's a point to being that specialized when you want to market yourself in a place and say, yes, I'm a fantastic C# developer. For sure, go for it. But being nimble and knowing and appreciating that what you're doing in C# means that you can adjust and use those Java concepts and build Android applications. It'll, with a little bit of adjustment, a little bit of time and relearning, give it a week or two to relearn the Java concepts in the Android space. It's similar in structure. Your data structures are going to be similar. Your algorithms are going to be similar. You just need to learn the boundaries around it. And as somebody who has built Android apps after building C#, I'm familiar with that. I'm okay with that. And it's an adjustment that I think we can make. I don't like the idea of drawing a line and saying, well, Android app developers are a different breed. They're not someone that I can collaborate with and exchange ideas with. I think we're all developers. I think you're right there. Let's collaborate, because at some point we're going to want to get together and build bigger systems of applications that help solve bigger problems for more people.
So you've got a passion for getting .NET back in education. And we've talked about
that's
that.
important.
And certainly, there are some teachers in high school that are using it now.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think that's going to look like, throughout this year? As .NET 6 is definitely simpler than previous versions where you can have 1, 2, and 3 line applications now again. And beyond. So I can't believe that the team is stopping working on simplification and accessibility. Just got this point. So
this was a big step. This was a very big step. We set the groundwork in .NET 5 with top level statements allowing you to start applications right there, making minimal APIs something easy to get started and running. That we have prototypes for getting Windows Forms applications started with just a couple lines of code in a minimal API approach. There's just a little bit of code change that's needed to make the Windows Forms and WPF applications start properly because of the way threading works in those application models. Not something that we could change and make work for .NET 6, but having that minimal approach to get those applications running is something that's definitely coming. I really like the idea of not having to write a lot of code and get a major application happening, right? Let you focus on building your code. You're the domain matter expert, the domain subject expert in your application. You shouldn't be writing stuff to manage threading and interact with the configuration of the web server. Hand that all off. Get some basic defaults, and if you need to adjust them, we have an easy API to adjust. I really like that. I think getting a simpler code model into educators' hands is something that we need to focus on, and building that curriculum appropriately, putting our tools together in a way that makes education more consumable. I look at the great example, Jeff. I've been trying to learn Kubernetes over the past few weeks. So I go out to the website, the Kubernetes documentation, and I get into the tutorial. And I start reading through the tutorial, and it says, okay, step 1, do this. Step 2, do this. And we're going to do this and show you all the complex things that you can do around setting up and deploying a Cassandra database to run on your cluster. And here's how you go through it. And there's all these pages of processes and all that. And I get to the last page, and it says, okay, you've got it running. And then it says, if you want to do just simple deploy this with some of the defaults, it's just this one line of code.
What?
Like, wait a sec.
Why wasn't that first?
Exactly. I went through an hour and a half of following this line by line, making sure I have all the code right, because I'm typing YAML. There isn't code correction, auto completion for some of these things that I'm typing into my text editor to get my database deployed properly. And I get to the very end and you could deploy this easy. Like, when we want to educate folks, we want them to be as successful as possible, as quickly as possible. Give me that basic feature first. Then let's start making it more complex. Then introduce. This is basic teaching. Start introducing concepts to make things more complex. We're now going to start adding in security, secret sharing, publishing and rerouting our network connections on different ports, setting up a load balancer in front with multiple replicas. These are fantastic concepts that when we're building a large-scale enterprise system, perfect ideas, great to do. Absolutely, I want to do that. Why can't I just run a database and get a little thing that pops up that says, okay, now you can store your contacts in this collection over here, and I create my 2 contacts: Jeff Palermo, Texas; Jeff Fritz, Pennsylvania. Done. Look at that. I've got 2 records. I'm successful. I've accomplished something. Instead of, I've got a gigabyte of data loaded and it's on 3 nodes over here, coming out on a non-standard port using a load balancer that was all set up. That's great. Get me successful with the simple stuff first. Yeah. Right? Like, and I do this with DevOps too, right? I want my build chain to start with, okay, I'm doing a pull request, just compile the application. Make sure that works. Right? Okay, that works. Now I'll introduce unit testing. Okay, because after I figure out that I got unit testing working, now I can add the automatic deploy, because I don't want to deploy until I know I've got tests. And adding now additional inspections and features, those steps to make sure that I've got something, and growing how it works. Yeah. We don't get frustrated as professionals building those things, because we're building on things that we've learned. We're building on these concepts that individually aren't hard. Together, dear Lord.
And we're building for an organization. I think that if we're talking about education, then intentionally we have to ignore, I would think, some areas of curriculum. For example, when I was learning, I was the chief product designer. I was my own architect. I was my own coder. I was my own tester. And I was my own user, my own operator, my own supporter, my own maintainer. And I think that in education, it seems to me that all these other things for team development, all that stuff, in education, it's just, let me build something for me.
Yeah. Get that first thing off the ground. I love the idea of giving students a Raspberry Pi 400, right? It's a little keyboard that has all the things in it. It comes with a mouse. You just have to plug it into an HDMI compatible display, drop an SD card in it so that you can save somewhere, and you're off and running with a little Linux-based machine that can do so much. Okay, I'm not looking at all these things pre-built for me for Windows or for Linux or all that. It's bare metal. Now start to learn those basics. And at $100 American to get a device like that, now I think that's an interesting educational experience, because I'm starting from the ground and I'm building my own things. I'm going to learn a little bit about operating system, about disk structure. and how we start adding things to that, I can still install Visual Studio Code or my favorite editor, my favorite tools, and grow with that. Then I can get into using a laptop and actually taking advantage of professional tools, Visual Studio, and other, I'm not going to mention, but other IDEs out there that can grow and build appropriately for whatever application you want. You want to use Xcode, great, go for it. You want to use Android Studio, fantastic. Those things are out there, and learn how to build with just the code editor on that Raspberry Pi, I think, is an educational experience. That's a pretty cool starting point.
So pulling back all the way to in second grade or third grade, when they just learned to read in some cases, is .NET 6 and the .NET notebooks, do you think that's the catalyst that's needed to get C# into places like code.org and Khan Academy that currently don't, that just stick with basically JavaScript? And mostly?
I think it's a lot closer. It's a big step in that direction. I haven't talked to those folks. I don't know if they've considered it, if they've looked at it. I definitely want to have those conversations and see. I think you're right. It'll get us there. I think being able to run notebooks inside of a Blazor WebAssembly runtime is going to .NET notebooks inside of a Blazor WebAssembly runtime is a huge thing. I don't think we can do that just yet, but I think that's a huge step for us to get .NET into that same model that JavaScript is, where you don't need tools, you don't need an editor, you don't need anything to get started. I mean, we can already run Visual Studio Code in the browser, and it goes and compiles and does things in the background. But if I can run notebooks where I can have my prose, my lesson around those code samples, now we're talking. Now we're in a much more interesting place for folks to learn. I saw a message from somebody in, I think it was in a YouTube comment on a video, talking about how easy it was for them to learn JavaScript because they didn't need to go buy developer tools or hardware so they could build and work with a compiler and need disk space for that and install things. They could just press F12 and start learning right there at the console in the browser. I believe that's why it's so popular, because it was already there since the late 90s in the browsers, and you just wrote text and it was interpreted, and you didn't have to buy or set up anything. Not because it's the best language out there or you got the fastest runtimes of it, far from it, but it just worked. It was the most accessible. Everybody had a browser on every device. That means you could press F12 and start writing code right there in the browser. Nothing wrong with that. Absolutely. That's a fantastic model. There's other programming languages that do other things that we want to show you. We want to share with you that we think are going to give you a better experience and help you accomplish things in a better way than you can with just JavaScript. So now, I can hear coming through the line some people saying, "Hey, wait a minute! I'm giving a computer merit badge class to a group of young scouts, or I'm giving a guest presentation for my third grade class over here, my kids' third grade class. You talked about this curriculum or whatnot, or these .NET notebooks. Hey, I'm going to your show notes right now. I want to see what I can use. So we'll make sure to include those resources that are available now, at least what's out there, just to equip people like you that are doing some of those things with the use of today." Yeah, there's an education pack that you can download and use with Visual Studio Code, and I've got a series of notebooks out there that I've been building for a live stream I do on Monday mornings. You can download them from GitHub, run them on your machine with Visual Studio Code, or you can even run them right there in your browser. Awesome. Well, hey, Jeff, thanks so much for coming back on the Azure DevOps Podcast, and there's a lot of good information. I'm going to be hard at work getting all this information jam-packed into these show notes. Thanks so much. It's been great to be here. Awesome. And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.